Kirivus met Daniel Hayes on a rainy evening at the colony's only bar. He was sitting alone in the corner, nursing a drink that had gone warm hours ago. He wore the gray coveralls of a maintenance worker, and his hands were rough with calluses from years of honest labor. There was nothing special about him. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. That was exactly why Kira noticed him. She had spent her childhood running. Her parents had died when she was 7, killed when Dominion warships burned their home world to ash. She had grown up on refugee ships, always moving, always afraid, always surrounded by people who carried weapons and spoke of violence like it was the weather. She had seen enough heroes and warriors to last 10 lifetimes. She was tired of them, so when she saw this quiet man sitting alone, asking nothing from anyone, she walked over and sat down across from him. "You look like you're waiting for something," she said. He looked up at her with tired brown eyes. "Not really. Just thinking." "About what?" He smiled, and it was a small, sad thing. "About how nice it is to be somewhere quiet." They talked for 3 hours that night. He told her he was a maintenance technician who had come to Meridian 7 looking for simple work. She told him she was a supply coordinator who had come looking for a place where nothing ever happened. They laughed about how boring the colony was. They agreed that boring was wonderful. 3 months later, they were married in the colony's small chapel. Kira wore a dress she had bought from a traveling merchant, and Daniel wore a clean shirt that he had ironed himself. There were only 12 guests. The ceremony lasted 15 minutes. It was perfect. Their life together was simple. They lived in a small house on the colony's outer ring, where the rent was cheap and the neighbors minded their own business. Daniel left for work early each morning and came home each evening with grease on his hands and a gentle smile on his face. He fixed water filtration systems, repaired broken generators, and maintained the life support equipment that kept everyone breathing. He was good at his job, but nobody praised him for it. That was the nature of maintenance work. When everything worked, nobody noticed. Daniel seemed to prefer it that way. Kira loved watching him in the evenings. He would sit on their small porch and look up at the stars, his face calm and unreadable. Sometimes she would join him, and they would sit together in comfortable silence. He never talked about his past, and she never asked. Everyone on Meridian 7 had come here to escape something. That was the unspoken rule of the colony. You didn't dig into other people's histories, but sometimes, late at night, Daniel would wake up screaming. The first time it happened, Kira was terrified. She found him sitting up in bed, covered in sweat, his eyes wild and unfocused. He was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists, every muscle in his body tight as a coiled spring. "Daniel," she whispered, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "Daniel, it's okay. You're safe." He flinched at her touch, and for a split second, something cold and dangerous flashed in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by confusion and shame. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Bad dream. Go back to sleep." She didn't go back to sleep. She lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing slowly return to normal, wondering what kind of dreams could make a man look like that. It happened maybe once a month. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Daniel never talked about it, and Kira learned not to ask. She would simply hold him until the shaking stopped, and in the morning, they would both pretend it hadn't happened. One afternoon while Daniel was at work, Kira was cleaning the house when she found an old toolbox pushed into the back of their closet. She had never seen it before. It was military issue. She could tell that much. The kind of heavy-duty container that soldiers use to store equipment in the field. She told herself she should leave it alone. She told herself it was none of her business. She opened it anyway. Inside, beneath a layer of ordinary tools, she found a set of metal tags on a chain. They were scratched and worn, the kind of identification tags that soldiers wore during wartime. She picked them up and read the words stamped into the metal. Hayes. Daniel J. Serial number. TS07749. Alpha Terran Special Operations Division. Kira stared at the tags for a long time. Terran Special Operations. She knew what that meant. Everyone who had lived through the Dominion Wars knew what that meant. They were the soldiers who did the jobs that nobody talked about. The ones who went behind enemy lines and never came back. The ones whose missions were classified so deeply that even their names were erased from official records. Her quiet husband, who fixed water pipes and grew tomatoes in their tiny garden, had been one of them. She should have felt betrayed. She should have demanded answers. But as she held those worn metal tags in her hands, all she could think about was the way Daniel screamed in his sleep. The way he flinched when she touched him unexpectedly. The way he sometimes stared at nothing, his eyes far away, lost in memories he would never share. Whatever he had done, whatever he had been, he had come here to escape it. Just like her. Kira put the tags back in the toolbox. She pushed the toolbox back into the closet. She never mentioned it to Daniel, and he never knew she had found it. Life went on. The seasons changed, the colony grew slowly, and Kira and Daniel built a quiet life together. He fixed things, she organized supplies, and in the evenings, they sat on their porch and watched the stars. Sometimes travelers passed through the colony and told stories of distant wars and political upheavals. Kira and Daniel listened politely and then went back to their simple routines. The Valorian traders, who visited Meridian 7, barely noticed them. To the tall, elegant aliens, humans were a minor species. Useful for labor, good for nothing else. They had no great empires, no ancient traditions, no powerful fleets. They were survivors, nothing more. Kira didn't mind being overlooked. Neither did Daniel. For 3 years, they lived in peace. 3 years of quiet mornings and gentle evenings. 3 years of pretending the past didn't exist. Then the Kath came and everything changed. The day the Kath arrived started like any other. Kira woke up early, made coffee, and kissed Daniel goodbye as he left for work in the eastern sector. The sky was clear, the air was cool, and nothing seemed wrong. The first sign of trouble came at noon. Kira was in the supply warehouse when the emergency sirens began to wail. She had never heard them before. In 3 years on Meridian 7, there had never been a reason to use them. She ran outside and looked up at the sky, and her blood turned to ice. A massive black ship was descending through the atmosphere. It was shaped like a blade, all sharp angles and dark metal, and it moved with the slow confidence of a predator that knew it had no enemies. Behind it came smaller vessels, dozens of them, spreading across the sky like a swarm of insects. Kath, someone whispered beside her. Oh God, it's the Kath. Kira knew about the Kath. Everyone did. They were slavers, pirates, raiders who preyed on weak colonies and unprotected settlements. They took what they wanted and killed anyone who resisted. They had no mercy, no conscience, and no fear. They were the monsters that parents warned their children about. And now they were here. The next few hours were chaos. Colony security tried to organize a defense, but they were farmers and engineers, not soldiers. They had a handful of old weapons and no real training. The Kath cut through them like they were nothing. Kira ran with the other civilians toward the community shelter, a reinforced bunker built into the colony's central hub. Around her, people screamed and cried and prayed. She heard gunfire in the distance, followed by the high-pitched whine of alien weapons. She smelled smoke and blood and fear. The shelter was packed with nearly 200 people when the heavy doors sealed shut. Families huddled together in the dim emergency lighting. Children sobbed while their parents tried to comfort them with lies. Everyone knew the truth. The Kath didn't take prisoners unless they wanted slaves. And slaves didn't live long. Kira found a corner and sat down with her back against the wall. Her hands were shaking. Her mind kept going to Daniel. He had been working in the eastern sector when the attack started. That was on the other side of the colony. There was no way he could have made it to the shelter. He was probably dead. She told herself to accept it. She told herself to be practical. People died all the time. She had learned that lesson when she was 7 years old, watching her parents burn. She had survived then, and she would survive now. That was what she did. She survived. But the thought of Daniel lying dead somewhere, alone, his gentle eyes staring at nothing, made her want to scream. Hours passed. The sounds of battle faded, replaced by something worse. The systematic thump of Kath soldiers kicking down doors, the screams of people being dragged away, the cold efficiency of an occupation. Through the shelter's thin walls, Kira could hear them getting closer. Then all the lights went out. It happened without warning. One moment, the emergency lights were casting their pale glow over the huddled survivors. The next, total darkness. People gasped and cried out, their fear multiplied by blindness. But it wasn't just the shelter. Through the ventilation system, Kira could hear chaos erupting outside. Kath soldiers were shouting in their harsh, clicking language. Their communications devices crackled with panicked transmissions. Kira's translator, Implant, picked up fragments of their speech. Most of it was too garbled to understand, but some words came through clearly. Movement in the tunnels. Can't see anything. How many are there? It's just one. More shouting. Then screaming. Then gunfire, wild and desperate. Then silence. The shelter's emergency lights flickered back on, dimmer than before, running on backup power. Everyone stared at each other with wide, frightened eyes. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The shelter door groaned. People scrambled backward, pushing against the walls, trying to get as far from the entrance as possible. Mothers covered their children's eyes. Old men stood in front of their families, holding makeshift weapons that would do nothing against Kath. Armored. The door opened. Daniel walked in. He was covered in blood. Blue blood, the color of Kath physiology, splattered across his face and clothes and hands. He moved differently than Kira had ever seen him move before. There was no gentleness in him now, no quiet patience. He walked like something built for violence, every step precise and controlled. He carried weapons. 3 of them, sleek and deadly, strapped across his body. They were not colony weapons. They were not even human weapons. They were military hardware that Kira had only seen in war documentaries. His eyes swept across the shelter, cataloging every face, checking every corner. When they landed on Kira, something flickered in them. Something that might have been relief or might have been pain. Then it was gone, buried beneath that cold, professional mask. "We need to move," he said. His voice was calm and flat, the voice of a man giving orders on a battlefield. "More Kath are coming. The main force is regrouping. We have maybe 20 minutes before they lock down this sector." Nobody moved. They were all staring at him like he was a ghost. Or a monster. "Daniel," Kira whispered. "What? Not now." He looked at her, and for just a moment, she saw her husband behind those cold eyes. "I'll explain everything later. I promise. But right now, we need to go." He turned and walked out of the shelter without looking back. After a long frozen moment, people started to follow him. They didn't know who he was or what had happened, but they knew that staying in the shelter meant capture or death. Kira was the last to leave. She paused at the door and looked at the trail of blue blood that marked the path Daniel had taken to reach them. She counted the bodies she could see in the corridor beyond. 7 Kath soldiers, all dead, all killed with brutal efficiency. Her quiet husband had done this. The man who grew tomatoes and fixed water pipes had walked through a warship's worth of soldiers like they were nothing. She followed him into the darkness. Daniel led them through tunnels that Kira didn't know existed. Maintenance passages, ventilation shafts, emergency corridors that hadn't been used since the colony was built. He moved through the darkness like he had memorized every inch of it, which, Kira realized with growing unease, he probably had. Nobody spoke. The survivors followed in a long, silent line, holding on to each other in the dim light of emergency glow strips. Children were carried by their parents. The elderly were supported by the young. And everyone tried not to look at the blue bloodstains that marked Daniel's path. Every few minutes, he would stop and hold up his hand. Everyone would freeze, barely breathing, while he listened to something they couldn't hear. Then he would nod and continue, leading them around patrols and past dangers that none of them ever saw. Once, they heard Kath soldiers in a corridor ahead. Daniel handed his weapons to a shocked colonist, disappeared into a side passage, and returned 3 minutes later. He took his weapons back and kept walking. He didn't explain. Nobody asked Dot after what felt like hours. They reached a heavy blast door set into the rock. Daniel punched a code into the panel, and the door slid open to reveal a large bunker filled with supplies, medical equipment, and emergency communications gear. "This is the colony's emergency shelter," Daniel said. It was the first time he had spoken since leaving the main shelter. It was built during the initial settlement but never officially added to the colony records. "The Kath won't know it exists." People stumbled inside, collapsing onto benches and floors, too exhausted and terrified to ask questions. Parents checked their children for injuries. Friends embraced friends. The normal human reactions to survival began to emerge, now that they had a moment to breathe. Kira watched Daniel move through the bunker, checking systems, activating equipment, doing the work of 10 people with quiet efficiency. He was still covered in Kath blood. He hadn't stopped to clean himself, hadn't shown any sign that he even noticed that an old man approached Daniel. His name was Marcus Hicks, and Kira knew him as a retired naval officer who had come to Meridian 7 to live out his final years in peace. He walked with a cane, his body worn down by age and old wounds, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He was staring at Daniel like he was looking at a ghost. "I know you," Hicks said. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of the bunker, everyone heard him. "I've seen your face before. In a classified file, 20 years ago, when I still had clearance for things that didn't officially exist." Daniel stopped what he was doing. He didn't turn around. His shoulders tensed, just slightly, like a man preparing for a blow. "You're wrong," he said flatly. "No." Hicks shook his head slowly. "No, I'm not. I never forget a face, especially not that one. They showed us your picture during a strategic briefing. They told us what you did. They told us you were dead." He paused. "They called you the ghost of Canner Station." The bunker went silent. Everyone was listening now, drawn by the weight in the old man's voice. Kira felt something cold settle in her chest. She knew about Canner Station. Everyone who had lived through the Dominion Wars knew about Canner Station. It was one of those stories that seemed too impossible to be true. The kind of legend that soldiers whispered about in bars when they had drunk too much. During the worst part of the war, when the Dominion had been winning on every front, something had happened at Canner Station. An entire enemy fleet, 47 ships, had been crippled in a single night. Over 2,000 soldiers killed. Command vessels disabled. Communication systems destroyed. The strategic defeat had turned the tide of the entire war. Official reports said it was a coordinated strike by Terran special operations teams. Dozens of soldiers working together in perfect synchronization. The unofficial story, the one that veterans told each other with fear in their eyes, was different. It was one man, one human soldier who had infiltrated 47 ships in 12 hours, who had killed the lights on every single one. who had moved through darkness like he was part in it, leaving nothing but bodies behind. The Dominion had called him a demon. Terran Command had called him an asset. The soldiers who survived encounters with him called him the Ghost. And then, after the war ended, he had simply vanished. 47 ships, Hicks continued, his voice barely above a whisper. In one night. I didn't believe it when they told us. I thought it was propaganda, something to boost morale. But the admirals believed it. The generals believed it. They were afraid of you, even though you were on our side. Daniel finally turned around. His face was blank, but his eyes were tired. So tired. Like a man who had been carrying a weight for too long. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. You ended the war. Hicks was looking at him with something between awe and terror. You single-handedly ended the bloodiest conflict in human history. And then you just disappeared. You came here to this little colony in the middle of nowhere, and you fixed water pipes. His voice cracked. Why? Daniel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Because I was tired of killing. He looked at Kira then, and she saw the man she had married. Not the ghost, not the legend, just Daniel. The man who had nightmares. The man who flinched when she touched him unexpectedly. The man who grew tomatoes and sat on their porch watching the stars. The man who had done terrible things and was trying, desperately, to be something else. I wanted to be someone who fixed things, he said, instead of someone who broke them. Kira didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to process any of this. Her husband was a legend, a ghost, a weapon that had ended a war. And she had slept beside him for 3 years, never knowing, never even suspecting. Before she could find words, an alarm began to beep on one of the monitoring stations. Daniel moved to it instantly, his expression hardening. The Kath are mobilizing, he said. They're calling for reinforcements. A Valorian observation ship is entering orbit. He looked at the survivors, then at his weapons. This isn't over yet. The ghost was waking up. Admiral Sitha Kane stood on the bridge of her observation vessel, watching the chaos unfold on Meridian 7 with growing disbelief. The tactical display in front of her showed a disaster that should have been impossible. She had come here expecting a routine operation. The Kath had asked for Valorian oversight on what they called a resource acquisition mission, which was their polite way of saying they were going to raid a human colony for slaves and supplies. It was distasteful work beneath the dignity of the Valorian coalition, but politics demanded cooperation with less civilized species. The colony had been a soft target. No military presence. No orbital defenses. A few hundred humans scratching out a living on a rock that nobody cared about. The Kath should have secured it within hours dot instead. Sitha was watching her allies die. Report, she demanded. Her voice sharp. Her tactical officer, a young Valorian named Cass, looked up from his console with fear in his eyes. 2 Kath cruisers have been disabled, Admiral. Their command crews are dead. Ground forces are reporting heavy casualties. From what? Did the humans have hidden defenses? A military garrison? No, Admiral. Cass swallowed hard. They're reporting a single hostile. 1 human. He's been moving through their formations for the past several hours. They can't stop him. They can't even see him. Sitha stared at him. 1 human? Yes, Admiral. The Kath are calling him a phantom. He disabled the first cruiser by infiltrating through a maintenance hatch and killing the bridge crew before anyone knew he was aboard. The second cruiser tried to seal all access points, but he found a way in any way. He killed their captain and destroyed their navigation systems. Sitha turned back to the tactical display. She watched red markers disappear one by one as Kath soldiers reported contact and then went silent. Whoever this human was, he was systematic, methodical. He wasn't just fighting back. He was dismantling the entire occupation force, piece by piece. "Get me intelligence," she ordered. "Everything we have on Terran special operations. Cross-reference with any operatives connected to unusual solo missions during the Dominion Wars." It took several minutes for the results to come back. When they did, Sitha felt her blood turn cold. The file was almost empty. Most of it was redacted, classified beyond even her clearance level. But there was a name. Daniel Hayes, a service record that simply said, "Special Operations Division." A single photograph of a young human male with tired brown eyes, and a warning. The warning was stamped in the universal military code for extreme threat. It was the kind of warning usually reserved for biological weapons or unstable antimatter devices. Sitha had never seen it applied to a single person before. Do not engage alone. Do not engage without overwhelming force. Do not assume death. Below the warning was a list of confirmed operations. Most of them were redacted, but a few names were visible. Sitha recognized some of them. Major battles in the Dominion Wars, strategic victories that had seemed impossible at the time, and at the bottom of the list, one operation that made her stop breathing. KYNAR Station. Every military officer in the galaxy knew about Keener Station. The Dominion had lost 47 ships in a single night, crippled by what they officially called a coordinated terrorist attack. The true story, the one that Valorian intelligence had pieced together years later, was much worse. One human had done it. One human had infiltrated an entire fleet, moving from ship to ship through the darkness, killing without mercy, destroying without hesitation. By the time the Dominion understood what was happening, it was already over. They had called him the Ghost. They had called him a demon. They had called him the reason the war ended. And now he was on Meridian 7. "Admiral," Kath said, his voice tight. "The Kath commander is requesting immediate air support. He says his ground forces are in full retreat." Sitha looked at the photograph on her screen. The young man with tired eyes. He had been maybe 25 when the picture was taken. Old enough to have seen combat. Young enough to still believe in something worth fighting for. He had killed 2,000 soldiers in one night. Not because he was angry. Not because he was cruel. Because it was his job. Because he was very, very good at his job. And now the Kath had threatened his home. "Pull back," Sitha said. Kath stared at her. "Admiral, all forces, Kath and Valorian, pull back to orbit, now." "But Admiral, the Kath commander is dead." Sitha cut him off. "He just doesn't know it yet. Every soldier on that planet is dead if they don't leave in the next 30 minutes. She turned to face her bridge crew. "I did not come here to lose ships to a phantom. This colony is not worth the cost. We are leaving." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then her officers began to move, transmitting orders, coordinating the withdrawal. On the planet below, Kath soldiers who were still alive began running for their dropships, abandoning equipment and wounded alike in their haste to escape. Sitha watched the retreat on her tactical display. She watched the human's movements, the way he seemed to be everywhere at once, cutting off escape routes, herding the enemy toward the landing zones. He wasn't trying to kill them all anymore. He was letting them go. He was giving them a chance to run. "Admiral," Kath said quietly. Why did he stop? He could have destroyed them completely. Sitha thought about the photograph. The tired eyes. The warning in his file. "Because he doesn't want to," she said. "Because killing is easy for him. Too easy." And somewhere along the way, he decided to stop. She watched the last Kath dropship lift off from the planet's surface. She watched the raiding fleet begin to withdraw, broken and humiliated by a single man on a backwater colony. "Mark this system as restricted," she ordered. "No Kath operations. No Valorian operations. No contact of any kind. She paused. Let him have his peace. We've taken enough from humanity already. The fleet jumped to faster than light speed and vanished, leaving Meridian 7 alone among the stars. On the surface, Daniel Hayes lowered his weapon and watched them go. He was covered in blood and dirt and exhaustion. His hands were shaking. His body ached in 100 places, but it was over. The ghost had protected his home. Now it was time for Daniel to go back to being just a man. The days after the attack were strange and quiet. The Kath were gone. Their ships disappeared into the darkness between stars, and Meridian 7 began the slow process of putting itself back together. Buildings were repaired. Crops were replanted. The dead were buried with simple ceremonies and genuine tears. Everyone talked about Daniel Hayes. The stories spread quickly, as stories do. The maintenance worker who had been something else. The quiet man who had saved them all. The ghost of Keener Station living among them for 3 years, and nobody had known. Some people called him a hero. Some people called him a monster. Most people didn't know what to call him, so they just avoided him when they saw him in the street. Daniel didn't seem to mind. He went back to his job, fixing broken generators and maintaining life support systems, just like before. He wore his gray coveralls and carried his tool bag and nodded politely to people who stared at him with fear in their eyes. If their whispers bothered him, he never showed it. The colonial government offered him medals. He declined. They offered him a leadership position in the new security force they were building. He declined that too. They offered him land, money, anything he wanted. He asked them to leave him alone. Eventually, they did. Kira didn't know how to feel. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand the man sleeping beside her. She had married Daniel because he was kind and quiet and safe. She had loved him for the gentle way he treated her, the patience he showed when she woke up from her own nightmares, the simple joy he found in growing vegetables and watching sunsets. All of that was real. She knew that now. The kindness was real. The gentleness was real. The man who held her when she was afraid was the same man who had killed 2,000 soldiers in one night. Both things were true. Both things were Daniel. One evening, about a week after the attack, Kira came home to find Daniel sitting on their porch, staring at the stars. His hands were clean for once, scrubbed free of grease and blood alike. He looked old in a way he hadn't before, tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. She sat down beside him without speaking. They stayed like that for a long time, watching the sky turn from blue to purple to black. "You could have told me," she finally said. Daniel didn't look at her. Would it have changed anything? Kira thought about the question. She thought about the metal tags she had found in his toolbox years ago and the choice she had made to put them back without asking. She thought about the nightmares she had comforted him through, never knowing what demons lived behind his eyes. She thought about the 3 years they had built together, the small joys and quiet moments that had made up their life. "No," she admitted. "I don't think it would have." He turned to look at her then, and his eyes were full of something she couldn't name. Hope, maybe? Or fear? Or both? "I never wanted you to see that part of me," he said quietly. "I spent 20 years being a weapon. I did things that I can't forget, no matter how hard I try. I hurt people. I killed people. I became something that wasn't really human anymore." His voice cracked slightly, and he looked away again, back at the stars. "After the war ended, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back to normal life. I couldn't pretend to be a regular person after everything I'd done. So I ran. I found the most boring, most forgotten colony in the galaxy, and I buried myself here. I told myself that if I could fix things instead of breaking them, if I could build something instead of destroying, maybe I could find a way to live with myself." He paused, his hands clenching in his lap. "And then I met you. And for the first time in my life, I wanted something more than just survival. I wanted to be someone worth loving, someone who deserved the kind of life we built together. He looked at her again, and his eyes were wet. I was so afraid you would find out. So afraid you would look at me and see the ghost instead of the man. Kira reached out and took his hand. It was rough with calluses, worn from years of honest work. The same hand that had killed thousands of enemy soldiers. The same hand that had gently planted seeds in their garden and held her close on cold nights. "I married you because you were kind," she said softly. "Because you listened to me when I talked. Because you made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt since I was a child." She squeezed his hand. "I didn't know why I felt that way. Now I do. You made me feel safe because you actually could keep me safe. From anything." Daniel let out a breath that he seemed to have been holding for years. "I'm not that person anymore," he said. "The ghost. The weapon. I don't want to be that person. You're not." Kira leaned against his shoulder. "You're Daniel Hayes, maintenance technician, tomato farmer, terrible cook." She smiled. "My husband." He laughed then, a soft, broken sound that was half sob. "I burned dinner one time. You burn dinner every time." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Somewhere out there, admirals and generals were updating their files, adding warnings about a small colony on the edge of known space. Politicians were debating the implications of a human legend emerging from retirement. Intelligence agencies were scrambling to understand what it meant. But here, on a small porch on a quiet colony, none of that mattered. "The nightmares won't stop," Daniel said quietly. "They never do. I'm always going to carry what I did. I know." Kira squeezed his hand again. "We'll carry it together." He turned to look at her, and she saw tears running down his face. Not the cold, hard man who had walked through fire to save them all. Just Daniel. Her Daniel. A broken man trying to heal. Held together by love and hope and the simple determination to be better than what he was. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not." She smiled and wiped a tear from his cheek. "But you're stuck with me anyway." Above them, the stars glittered cold and distant, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal lives. But here, in this moment, the universe felt a little smaller, a little warmer, a little more like home. The ghost of Keener Station had died in the tunnels beneath. Meridian 7. The man who emerged was something different. Something new. Something that had earned the right to rest. Daniel Hayes. Maintenance technician, husband, and survivor. Watched the sunset with his wife and let himself believe, for the first time in 20 years, that he might finally be at peace. The war was over. The killing was done. He was home.